you can imagine you're ending a shift and you're scraping off plates, so you're taking food from the kitchen and you're filling up a big 150 litre bin time after time. And after a 9-hour, 10-hour shift, you're pretty hungry. And the last thing you want to be doing is throwing food away.
Hi, I'm Faiza, social media manager at ONQOR, and today I'm joined with Jamie, co-founder of Too Good To Go, the app rescuing unsold food and offering surprise bags of surplus food at great prices. They rescued over 120 million meals, preventing over 300,000 tons of CO2 emissions from entering the Earth's atmosphere. I hope you enjoyed the show. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you very much for having me.
So to kick off, I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to start Too Good To Go and tackle the issue of food waste? For
me, the motivation behind wanting to address and reduce food waste really comes and stems from the size of the problem itself. 40% of the food that we produce ends up being wasted. And this is at a time when we're literally living in a climate emergency. So food waste accounts for 10% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And we're having this conversation here in March when we've just hit a year of global warming over 1.5 degrees. So we really are living the climate crisis right now, and food waste is often regarded as the number one action that we as individuals can take to reverse the effects of climate change. So in short, for me, the motivation behind wanting to start a business and a social impact business is because I'm motivated by creating social and environmental impact.
So was there anything in your background that made you pick food waste in particular, or anything that got you into food that triggered your interest?
Well, people often think with a surname like Crummie, the heavens have aligned and I've fallen into this world of work because there's something called normative determinism, where your name itself dictates what type of work you go into. In fact, I even had a former colleague who asked me if I'd legally change my name to
Have you?
And I was like, I think I would come up with something slightly more creative than just Crummie, the crumbs of a sandwich or something like that. But no, for me, it isn't that I've sort of come from a background of chefs or my parents were farmers or something like that. But for me, the real motivation behind getting into food waste was an opportunity to create, as I say, environmental and social impact. In fact, my first job was working in a supermarket where I actually unconsciously was seeing food waste happening at scale. But it wasn't until a few years later that I was living and working out in Australia, and I worked, I had a few different jobs to help me get by. And one of them was working in an events organization. And that was where I encountered consciously, food waste for the very first time. So you can imagine you're ending a shift and you're scraping off plates, so you're taking food from the kitchen and you're filling up a big 150 litre bin time after time. And that was a very visceral experience, I say. And after a 9-hour, 10-hour shift, you're pretty hungry. And the last thing you want to be doing is throwing food away. And so that was very much the time in when food waste was, a seed that was planted. And it wasn't until I came back to the UK, I met a group of people who were dumpster divers, really. And they would go and they would take food from bins, much like the bins that I'd previously been having to throw food away in. And they'd repurpose this food into things like stews, into casseroles, into soups. And, that was amazing. Really, really incredible work of which they were doing. But it got me thinking, how can we actually rescue this food before it hits the bin in the first place?
What was their initial public response like when Too Good To Go launched the app, particularly regarding people's openness to trying surplus or leftover food products?
Well, I think if we cast our minds back to 2015, the whole public discourse and narrative around food waste has really evolved since then. We started Too Good To Go after the Sustainable Development Goals, and there's a specific goal within there, 12.3, which calls for a 50% reduction of food waste by 2030. And this was when people started to talk about about the importance of reducing food waste, but it wasn't something which took over the headlines of newspapers, nor were there a huge amount of innovations out there. And so we were very much like first to market. We were one of the first businesses to create a marketplace around surplus food. I'd love to say that everyone took to it like ducks to water, but it wasn't completely like that. I mean, lots of businesses really shared our vision and wanted to come on this journey with us. After all, they've spent their entire day serving and preparing food. The last thing they want to have to do is end up throwing that away. So we were a great solution for them. But at the same time, we've gone on a bit of a journey ourselves, and the way we talk about surplus food and the way even our app sort of works right now and our technology works is definitely improved since then. So there were a few doors closed in our faces, but I think overwhelmingly the appetite towards something like Too Good To Go when we first started was overwhelmingly positive. I think, again, if we look back over these past 9 years, from 2015 through to now in 2024, that conversation around food waste has totally changed. It's totally evolved, and for the good. We go back and we think of these sustainable development goals that I mentioned earlier, and now we fast forward to COP in November of last year. Finally food was actually spoken about on a geopolitical stage for like the first time ever. So that, and to me, was like a really like groundbreaking moment. And of course it could have gone further, and of course, there could have been more that was done, but the very notion of it being discussed felt like something that was a far cry from, COP26 when I was up in Glasgow, really asking for food and food waste to be spoken about at that conference and in that arena. So really, there has been some tangible change. And when we think of how businesses are now engaging on the topic of food waste, I think there's been, great support. So here in the UK, we've got more and more businesses now who are asking the government to introduce measures like mandatory food waste reporting. And for that itself, again, I think is a testament to how much food waste itself has become part of that public narrative, but also how businesses are really wanting to show leadership in this area. We've rescued now over 300 million meals from going to waste over these past few years. We've got 150,000+ businesses and 90 million people who have downloaded our app across 17 countries and 2 continents. We're rescuing about 4 meals every single second. But at the same time, there's 40,000 meals which are being wasted. So there's like so much more that we can be doing. But I like to think that we've left a bit of a footprint on this, and long may it continue.
As a consumer, I think so too. Of just like, you've made it so easily accessible for us to just do better and think about being more conscious.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, honestly, I think because my mum does it a lot, and having this app is just so beneficial. She finds it so easy, and I'm just like, I love that you find it so easy, because she always calls me to ask anything. So it's also nice to know that she's also having that easy accessibility to do the same as well.
Fundamentally, that's what we're trying to do is making something like rescuing food really simple. I guess what we really need is everyone to reduce food waste imperfectly rather than a few people reducing food waste perfectly, because we need to create that impact at scale. So it's great to hear that yourself and your mum have enjoyed using Too Good To Go, because really that is what we're trying to do, is empower people by giving them simple tools which make fighting food waste simple.
I've tried like loads of different foods as well that I wouldn't have, but I just tried it because it was on Too Good To Go. And I was like,
I love that.
Never would have tried that originally, but love that I have, and I've loved it ever since.
The discovery factor is a big thing.
It really adds to it, and it just adds to the experience, and wanting to even go back on the app again to be like, okay, what am I going to have today that's going to tickle my fancy? It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, the surprise bag element itself is something which is fun. You never really know what it is you're going to get, and I'd can't really count the amount of times that people have quoted Forrest Gump at me when we've talked about the surprise bag. But, that is what we're trying to do. It's doing something which is, good for the environment and good for your own wallet.
Yeah.
But it's something which is fun.
As you've grown Too Good To Go, what has been some of the most rewarding and challenging moments?
I think some of the most rewarding moments of growing Too Good To Go, or of seeing Too Good To Go grow, is really when you sit back to reflect. Too Good To Go itself was something which was, started on a kitchen table. And we're now in a situation where we almost have a seat at the table, where we can speak to big businesses, where we can speak to different world leaders and politicians about the importance of reducing food waste. So that for me is very much like a pinch yourself moment to see that journey that we've gone on. But at the same time, those most rewarding things are often hearing stories like the one you just shared with yourself and your mother using Too Good To Go together and making you think differently about food waste. That's what's really the most amazing thing for me, is that we've created a tool which is bringing people together and that they really see the value in it. And when I think back of that, there is something which is fantastic. And on top of that, it's seeing some iconic brands as well being involved in Too Good To Go and wanting to proactively and effectively reduce food waste, which shows to me, it gives me a huge sense of optimism that not only do lots of people want to reduce food waste, but big businesses want to start their sustainability journey and want to really dramatically reduce food waste. So there's lots to sort of reflect on.
Anything challenging that has been along the way?
I think there's certainly been a lot of challenges. I often describe, starting a business a bit like a roller coaster. For every big milestone or something which we want to celebrate, it's often followed by a big challenge or something which hasn't quite gone according to plan. I think when we look back over these past 8-9 years, COVID itself was a huge challenge for us. When we think back to sort of March 2020, majority of our partners ended up sort of closing down overnight. Now that didn't mean that food waste had stopped. It just meant that it sort of trickled back down the food value chain. But that was a hugely challenging time for ourselves at Too Good To Go, as it was for so many different businesses and for people all across the globe. Looking back, we also grew in those years as well, which showed the sort of the resilience and character within the people that work at Too Good To Go and how we try to find other ways to rescue food when many of the typical ways in which we would rescue it weren't open to us. So that was probably the biggest challenge that we've come through, and really, really sadly and regrettably, lots of our partner stores weren't able to make it through that period itself.
Looking ahead, what are some of the biggest challenges you anticipate to fight against food waste?
A big challenge we have is learning how to effectively collaborate with more businesses, with more communities, and hopefully with more governments and regulatory bodies as well, to really work together to see how we can dramatically reduce food waste, because it is such a huge problem. And at the moment we're expanding across the US. So we're recently just launched in Colorado, in Denver, which is a big thing for me because I got family which is based over there. So that's great, but it's such a huge country, which in itself comes with lots of challenges as well.
What are your future goals for Too Good To Go, both in terms of expansion and impact for more sustainable food system?
A big question.
Big question.
What are our views when it comes to a more sustainable food system? The thing to really point out here is how complicated our food system is. And fundamentally, our food system is broken, which is why we're wasting so much food. So for us, the way in which we can get to a more sustainable, also a more resilient food system, one which isn't, we look at the moment in how we've had, the highest inflation within food prices since the Ukraine war. and how that's been a really driving factor. For us, what we really see as a way to create a more resilient food system, one which is much more sustainable, is really by addressing food waste. Similarly, when we look at projections in growing world populations, we're going to have a population of 10.5 billion people by 2080. And so that is going to result in much more pressures in demands on food, but it's probably likely going to result in greater food production as well, unless we can dramatically reduce our food waste, which has to be that first point of call, because our food system is responsible for over a third of the planet's greenhouse gas emissions. Really reducing food waste for us is that number one way to create a more sustainable food system itself. So the future for us at the moment is really looking at how we can create impact at scale. So working with more businesses. It means expanding initiatives we have, like our date label campaign, which is our look, smell, taste initiative, where we work with FMCG brands to print a label that helps consumers to reduce food waste within their own homes. It also means investing in new technologies or new innovations to really help us to address food waste across that food value chain. So within households, within food service and hospitality, within retail, but also within manufacturing as well.
So to finish off, I wanted to ask you, what is the mantra that you live by?
I think there's a few things within sort of this mantra I have, and one is really about celebrating, and it's celebrating those wins, big or small. If you remember that analogy I shared earlier of the roller coaster, one thing I think which has really helped to create resilience within myself, but also across our team, is we've been able to celebrate some of those small wins, so that when those challenging times do come, we're brought together and we remember what those good times feel like, and we want to get back there. So I think really celebrating and keeping that positive mindset has been a strong mantra for myself.
Oh, I love that so much. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, really, really a pleasure to be here. It's great to speak with other B Corps as well.
Yes, thank you so much.